Russia is bleeding itself dry in the fields around Donetsk. Not metaphorically, literally. At the current rate of advance, Russian forces would need 183 years to capture the remaining Ukrainian-held territory in Donetsk Oblast. 183 years. And to achieve even that inglorious victory, Moscow would have to sacrifice another 1.5 million Russian soldiers. Let that sink in for a moment. This is not a story about a grinding attritional campaign where both sides trade blows in the mud. This is the visible, irrefutable proof that Vladimir Putin's entire military doctrine for the Donbass has already collapsed. What you are witnessing is not slow progress. It is the systematic exposure of Russia's outdated assumptions about mass and momentum meeting a Ukrainian defense that has adapted faster, smarter, and more lethally than anything the Russian general staff ever planned for. I have spent decades studying how armies move, how doctrines either evolve or die on the battlefield. And right now in Donetsk, Russia's doctrine is dying in real time. The numbers do not lie. The battlefield does not lie. And the longer Putin pretends otherwise, the more certain this outcome becomes. Pull the lens back with me for just a moment. When Putin launched his so-called special military operation in February 2022, the Russian high command believed the Donbass would fall in weeks. Their entire concept of operations rested on three fatal assumptions. First, that sheer mass of artillery, tanks, and conscripts would overwhelm Ukrainian positions. Second, that Ukrainian forces would collapse under the weight of Russian fires and maneuver exactly as Soviet-era models predicted. And third, that time was on Russia's side because the West would tire and Ukraine would run out of will. Every single one of those assumptions has been shredded by Ukrainian adaptation and Western resolve. What looked like an unstoppable steamroller on paper has become a meat grinder that Russia cannot sustain within Putin's lifetime. Look at the early war context. Russia poured hundreds of thousands of troops and thousands of armored vehicles into the Donbass, expecting a classic combined arms breakthrough. They seized territory, yes, but at catastrophic cost. By the time they finally took Bakhmut in 2023, after months of human wave assaults, the city was rubble, and the Russian army had lost the equivalent of entire brigades in elite assault units. That should have been a warning. Instead, Moscow doubled down. They reorganized, mobilized more bodies, and told the world they were preparing the decisive push to finish the job in Donetsk. Fast forward to 2026. The spring-summer offensive is already underway, and the results are damning. Russian forces have clawed forward a few hundred meters per week in places like the Pokrovsk direction and around Kostiantynivka, a few hundred meters, not kilometers, meters. In the first 3 months of 2026 alone, the average daily gain across the entire theater dropped to roughly 5.5 square kilometers per day, and in the critical Donetsk sectors, it is far slower. Ukrainian forces defending from prepared positions in the fortress belt running through Sloviansk and Kramatorsk have turned every tree line, every windbreak, every ridge into a kill zone dominated by drones, precision artillery, and anti-tank systems. Let me walk you through what this actually means at the operational level. Russian assault groups, often platoon-sized or smaller, push forward under heavy fire support, only to be shredded by FPV drones and artillery before they can consolidate. Geolocated footage and open source reporting show repeated mechanized attempts east of Chasiv Yar and near Dobropilya that never make it beyond the line of contact. The Russian command keeps throwing more meat into the machine, claiming advances of dozens of settlements, yet independent analysis confirms only a handful of verified gains, often measured in single-digit square kilometers per month in the priority Donetsk axis. And here is the counterintuitive truth the mainstream coverage keeps missing. This is not Ukrainian weakness. This is Ukrainian doctrinal superiority. Ukraine has turned the attrition game into an asymmetric masterclass. While Russia burns through Soviet-era stockpiles and newly mobilized conscripts at rates approaching 1,500 casualties per day in peak periods, Ukraine has integrated cheap drones, Western precision munitions, and real-time battlefield intelligence into a defense that multiplies every defender's effectiveness. The hidden military variable is adaptation speed. Ukraine learns faster, Russia repeats the same failed tactics and calls it strategy. Now let us escalate the chronology and watch the pattern compound. After the fall of Avdiivka in early 2024, Moscow declared it the gateway to the rest of Donetsk. 2 years later, Russian forces are still grinding toward Pokrovsk, a town they have been fixated on for nearly 2 years. Gains measured in single kilometers have come at the price of hundreds of armored vehicles and thousands of lives. In the Hryshyn and Novopavlivka directions, Russian assaults continue, but Ukrainian counteractions and deep strikes keep the tempo broken. Every time Moscow claims a village or a tree line, the cost is disproportionate. Ukrainian intelligence and Western partners have documented Russian casualty ratios climbing to over 300 per square kilometer captured in recent months. 300 Russian soldiers rendered combat ineffective for every square kilometer gained. At that burn rate, even the most optimistic projections for the fortress belt cities become mathematically impossible within any reasonable time frame. And it gets even more serious from here, because this is no longer just a tactical stalemate. It is exposing Russia's industrial and state-level collapse in manpower and materiel. Russia's recruitment has fallen below its casualty rate for the first time since the invasion began. Covert mobilization efforts are now targeting businesses and regional quotas because the volunteer pool has dried up. Putin's so-called meat grinder strategy is literally running out of meat. Factories cannot replace equipment fast enough. The T-62s and T-55s pulled from storage are proof not of ingenuity, but of desperation. Every drone strike on Russian rear areas, every successful Ukrainian deep operation against logistics hubs compounds the problem. Russia is burning through its war chest faster than it can replenish it, while Ukraine's partners continue to deliver the systems that keep the defense viable. Pull the lens back further to the economic warfare layer. Sanctions, export controls, and the sheer cost of sustaining 500,000 troops in Ukraine have hollowed out Russia's ability to wage prolonged high-intensity conflict. Oil revenues are under pressure. The ruble is propped up by emergency measures. And the demographic reality is brutal. Russia cannot afford to lose another 1.5 million soldiers without triggering societal breakdown. Putin knows this. His generals know this. Yet the orders keep coming because admitting the truth would shatter the entire narrative of inevitable victory. Here we arrive at the climactic turning point playing out right now in the Donetsk theater. The fortress belt remains intact. Slovyansk and Kramatorsk are not under immediate threat despite months of Russian claims. Ukrainian forces have not only held the line but conducted localized counterattacks that reclaim ground and force Russia to divert reserves. In the last week alone, Russian assaults in the Kostiantynivka, Druskivka, and Dobropilya areas have been blunted with minimal Ukrainian losses while exacting heavy tolls on the attackers. The drone-dominated battlefield has turned Russian armor into rolling coffins and infantry assaults into suicide missions. What Moscow hoped would be the decisive summer offensive has instead become a slow-motion demonstration of doctrinal failure. The very assumptions that underpin the original invasion, mass over quality, fire's dominance without adaptation, centralized command without flexibility, are being dismantled village by village. What happens next changes everything, because time is no longer Russia's ally. Putin is 73 years old. Even if he lives another 20 years, the math does not work. 183 years to finish Donetsk alone. The rest of Ukraine? The ambassador's projection is stark. Over 120 million Russian lives and centuries of conflict. That is not strategy. That is delusion dressed up as resolve. The broader lesson here is clear, and it is decisive. Russia's military has been exposed as a paper tiger in modern warfare. It can seize a village here and a tree line there only by paying a price that no rational state would accept for such marginal returns. Ukraine, by contrast, has demonstrated that a smaller, smarter, more adaptive force backed by the right technology and the right partners can neutralize a larger adversary's numerical advantage indefinitely. This is not stalemate. This is the slow, inexorable erosion of Russian combat power, while Ukrainian resilience only grows stronger. History will record this phase of the war as the moment when Putin's gamble in Donetsk proved that Russia cannot win the adaptation race. The fortress belt will hold. Ukrainian forces will continue to impose unsustainable costs, and the Kremlin's cognitive warfare, those exaggerated claims of massive gains and imminent victory, will ring increasingly hollow to anyone paying attention to the actual battlefield data. So, what does this mean for the months ahead? The Russian offensive will continue because Putin cannot afford to stop, but it will continue to deliver diminishing returns at ever higher costs. Ukrainian deep strikes will keep degrading Russian logistics. Western support, properly sustained, will ensure the defense remains viable, and the demographic and industrial realities will eventually force Moscow into an impossible choice: escalate in ways that risk broader conflict, or admit that the war in Donetsk has become unwinnable on Russia's terms. The verdict is already written in the numbers. Russia would need 183 years and another 1.5 million dead just to take Donetsk. Vladimir Putin does not have 183 years. He does not even have the political capital to sustain the current burn rate much longer without cracking the foundations of his own regime. Stay with us because those questions do not have simple answers. The battlefield in Donetsk is revealing truths about modern warfare that will echo far beyond this conflict. Ukraine is not just defending territory. It is redefining what victory looks like when adaptation outpaces brute force, and the world is watching. The pattern is clear, the failure is structural, and the outcome is no longer in doubt.